Well, I'm glad you asked. Of course we can. Alright, let's see what we can do with this PT Cruiser. I'm excited for this because I wanted to do this car for a long time, redesign it for a long time. I just wanted to wait for the right moment when I felt ready to do this iconic design and try to bring it into the modern day. So what we're going to do with this redesign in general is to remove all the 90s styling. We don't want the roundness. We want to sharpen everything up, pretty much define the lines a bit more than what it is right now. But at the same time, we don't want to make it into a normal, boring MPV or minivan or whatever you want to call this. We want to keep the same proportions of the PT Cruiser, but restyle it into a modern design. So, starting off, for starters, what we want to do is, of course, remove the roundness. We have round corners and edges all over this car, and what we want to do is sharpen all of these lines up to create something more defined and more a little bit, maybe a little bit more aggressive. I'm not sure that's the right word, but just more of an architectural approach to the redesign of this car. We're going to take some cues from Chrysler's current design language and also from the general design language of these times. So these lights, for example, they're going to have to go, and what I'm going to do is redesign them into something more square-like, something like this, for example. And we are going to implement one of the biggest trends in car design this year, last year, probably next year as well. And that is, we're going to give it a light bar that goes right across here, somewhere down here, from one rear light to stretching all the way to the other. I think manufacturers are doing this graphically. There is a really good reason why you want a light bar in the rear, because if you have a kind of a narrow car, and this is not the widest car out there, but if you add a light bar or something graphically that stretches from one end point of the car all over to the other point, that is going to give the idea, or it's going to feel like it's a wider car than it actually is, because you have this long continuous graphic form stretching from one point to the other. So that might be one reason why companies are doing this today. And also, it looks cool. I mean, it just gives some it kind of ties everything together when it comes to light design, and it just connects the two graphic elements that used to be separate, but nowadays pretty much 90% of all new cars have some sort of light bar in between the rear lights. So that's one thing that we're going to add. I want to work with the side right here. So we have a flat surface right here. We have a flat surface right here, and these are not small surfaces. They're pretty large areas where nothing really goes on. So what I want to do is create some sort of graphics in here. We can have maybe some modern touches to these areas of the car. Maybe have some crease going or something like that, and also add something that breaks up this large surface in the rear. Maybe add some sort of graphic element right there. I also want to add a larger top spoiler or wing or whatever you want to call this that's integrated in the design. Nothing like Fast and the Furious style, but just something subtle that gives it a more, if you look at it from a side view, it's going to give it a more distinct end point at the top. And that's one of the ways that we're going to reduce this roundness that we have, especially if we look at it from a side view. We want to have it just a little bit more sharp at the top as well. I'm also going to remove this bumper down here. We're going to have some design that goes like this, or some sort of graphic element that breaks this up, because that's one way of making the rear not look so tall. We want to reduce the area of gray that goes from this top right here, and this stock PT Cruiser all the way down here. We have the same kind of shade of gray, so we want to break that up with adding something down here so that the distance goes from this distance to this distance right here. So we have a shorter distance that graphically is going to make the car look a little bit shorter and not so tall when you look at it from the rear. And also when we have this diffuser or whatever part down here, we want to add some modern looking exhaust tips, maybe squares, maybe round. We're going to have to play around with that and see what fits this car specifically. Another thing, pretty important thing, is we're going to work on the windows here as well. So we see, if you look at this window here, this side window and also the rear window, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, we have these rounded corners that goes all around the window. Every single corner of every single window is rounded, and this is very typical for 90s styling. We want to remove that, and there is a reason for that. There's a reason we want to remove it. It's because we want to add some base to the top half of this car. So what I mean by that is, if we cut this car in half right here, the top half is not gonna have a direction. It's not gonna have a weight to it, and graphically we want to add some weight to it. And we do that by adding a baseline to the windows. And we do that by creating a sharp corner at this point right here, and also a sharp corner at this point right here, and not have these rounded areas right here. The reason why that is going to give some graphical weight to the top half is because mentally we think of baselines as being flat. So we can have any product, we can have, for example, let's take a house, for example. We have a house right here. We can have any kind of shape going for the house. The top part can be any type of shape like this. We can maybe have a round surface like that at the top, but the base part is always going to be flat. So mentally, when we look at something that has a shape on top and then it just goes down to a flat surface, that is going to give some weight down graphically, if that makes sense. And that's exactly what we want to do with the windows. So I'm going to redesign these windows and give the top part of this car some weight down and visually reduce how tall it actually is. That's pretty much going to be the general mission with this redesign, is to bring down the height of this car, or the PT Cruiser, not make it look so tall, make it a little bit more sporty, and make it look like it's more planted to the ground. Another thing we have to do to help achieve that is, of course, working on these wheels here. I don't particularly like this distance right here. I want to work on that and have that be shorter and upgrade these wheels and tires into something that Chrysler could be using today. So those are the major changes that we're going to do throughout this redesign. We're probably going to add more stuff than this that I'm going to think of when I see the elements take shape. When the design starts to come together, I usually come up with other ideas that might work better than this right here. But we're gonna jump into Photoshop right now and start the redesign, and let's see how this goes. Now, before we get into the sketching part, just make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you get notified when new videos are uploaded every single week. The Chrysler PT Cruiser is a compact MPV and was launched in 2000 and stayed in production until 2010 with a total of 1.3 million PT Cruisers made. Out of those, about 1 million were sold in the US. It was designed by GM designer Brian Nesbitt and was first introduced as a concept called Pronto Cruiser in 1998. The Pronto Cruiser was designed as a modern interpretation of the Chrysler Airflow with Dodge Neon components. However, the final design used a completely separate platform. Other designs from Nesbitt's portfolio includes the similarly retro Chevy HHR, the 7th generation Chevrolet Malibu, and the 1997 Chrysler CCV, which had been conceived as a Chinese people's car with bodywork constructed of recycled plastic bottles. Originally designated as the PT, which stood for Plymouth Truck and intended as a part of the Plymouth lineup, the model was certified as a truck by NHTSA standards. But when the Plymouth brand disappeared, the PT Cruiser was instead brought to the market as part of Chrysler's range, and now the letters PT stood for personal transport, since they couldn't use the original Plymouth truck anymore since the brand was no longer existing. Now, what if we take a look back at Chrysler's models from the late 90s, early 2000s? What we see is the typical design language of this era. Round shapes with lines melting into each other was the trend back in those days. During the close to 20 years since the PT Cruiser was introduced, a lot has changed when it comes to design and styling of cars. Today we generally have a boxier design language with sharp defined lines and hard corners connecting long sweeping surfaces. I've always find it interesting to look back in time and study how car design and styling has changed over the years. It kind of makes you wonder what will come next. So if the PT Cruiser looked like this in the early 2000s, what could it possibly look like if we implemented today's design trends onto its original proportions? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore next. So what we've done so far in this redesign is the first step that I was talking about in the beginning of this video, in the brief of this redesign, and that is to sharpen everything up and completely change the design language of this car, because it's been 20 years since the PT Cruiser was introduced, and as I just showed you, a lot has happened in the design language of cars since it was introduced. And what we want to do is take cues from today's design language, implement it onto this PT Cruiser. And a big part of that has to do with graphics. The graphics for these kind of cars is more important than any regular car because of the shape of the PT Cruiser. It's not a traditional shape, it looks tall, and we want to bring it down by using graphical elements. I know the PT Cruiser gets a lot of hate for the way it looks, but me personally, I always like these weird designs. For me, the budget dream garage under $10,000 would be probably a PT Cruiser, a Fiat Multipla, and a Pontiac Aztek. That would be such a cool garage because the cars in there would be so original and so different that every time I look at them, they would just put a smile on my face. And maybe even throw in a SsangYong Rodeos for the family adventures while we're at it. It's not very often that car manufacturers can afford to step out of the boundaries like they did with the PT Cruiser and the Aztek and the Multipla. So every time they do, I really appreciate it. Even though the design itself might not be the most beautiful car, that's not the point. The point is that they actually stepped out of their comfort zone and created something that looks very unique and that people will definitely remember. Now we're almost coming to an end of this redesign. I have a few details left to show you that I want to adjust, and then I'm going to show you, of course, the before and after. We have a few details, such as this number plate in the back. I know people are gonna comment that it doesn't have door handles, but hey, look at Tesla. You just have to touch the doors and it pops open just like magic. And let's say that this car has the same functionality as a Tesla in that regard. Anyway, it makes the side looks extremely clean, and that's the look I wanted to keep on this redesign. So that's the redesign of the PT Cruiser. I really liked how this turned out, and I think we did a good job taking the original proportions of the PT Cruiser and bringing it into a modern day and modern design. We kept the same proportions, we reduced the height of it. It's still the same height, but as I said in the beginning, these graphical elements, the lower part of the black diffuser and the cut line or the integrated spoiler in the middle of the rear there, it kind of breaks everything up and makes it look shorter than what it actually is. I would love to make a front view of this, but I'm only going to do it if this video gets 5,000 likes. I know we can do it. With your help, we can definitely do it. So don't forget to hit the like button before you leave this video, and let's get the front view up there. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me today. I hope you have a fantastic day. I'm the Sketch Monkey, and I will see you in the next video. Do you want to learn how to sketch cars and products? Check out my online courses in the description below, where you'll learn everything from the basic tools to use, analog sketching with pen, paper, and markers, digital sketching using Photoshop and a tablet. You also get downloadable resources and templates and so much more. For those of you who aspire to one day work as a designer, I'll even walk you through each page and structure of my 2 portfolios that got me into a master's degree in car design in Italy and got me my first job as an industrial designer right here in Florida. All courses are 100% online, which means that you can access the courses at any time from anywhere. Click the link below in the description to learn more. I'll see you on the inside.